A wealthy socialite invites her humble seamstress mother-in-law to a high-society gala as a joke, only to watch her become the most admired woman in the room. New York City shimmered that night like it was dressed for royalty. Crystal chandeliers poured golden light across a historic ballroom, their reflections dancing over polished marble floors. Champagne glasses clinked softly in the background. A live orchestra played something slow and elegant, the kind of music that makes success feel cinematic. Everywhere you looked, there were gowns stitched with designer labels, tailored tuxedos, diamond necklaces catching the light at just the right angle. This was not just a party. This was a statement. At the center of it all was Bobby, the self-made CEO whose tech company had just secured the biggest contract in its history. Tonight was meant to celebrate vision, ambition, and achievement. Investors, board members, social elites, they had all gathered to applaud the man who had built something from nothing. But in rooms like this, applause is rarely the only thing being measured. Status floated invisibly between conversations. Who arrived first? Who sat closest to the stage? Who wore what designer? Every smile carried a quiet calculation. Every introduction held an unspoken evaluation. And moving through it all with effortless precision was Kathy. She wore a custom designer gown that hugged her frame perfectly, her jewelry subtle but unmistakably expensive. She greeted guests by name, air-kissed cheeks, laughed lightly at jokes that were not particularly funny. She belonged here, or at least she knew how to look like she did. This is where I'm meant to shine, she thought, adjusting the bracelet on her wrist as she scanned the room. Across the ballroom, Bobby stood near the entrance instead of basking in the spotlight. His expression was polite, grateful, but distracted. He kept glancing toward the large doors, as if waiting for someone important. Kathy noticed. "You don't have to stand here," she murmured sweetly, her hand resting on his arm. "Your guests are inside." "I know," Bobby replied softly. "I just want to greet my mother when she arrives." A flicker passed across Kathy's face, so subtle most would miss it. His mother. Tonight was supposed to be flawless, controlled, impressive, every detail polished to perfection. And yet, beneath the glittering surface of celebration, something else lingered, something quieter, more deliberate, because sometimes the most dangerous plans are not loud. They are dressed in silk and hidden behind smiles. Around the room, Kathy's friends whispered among themselves, casting occasional glances toward the entrance. There was a certain anticipation in their eyes, not excitement for a guest, but curiosity for a spectacle. What happens when two worlds collide? The orchestra swelled, laughter echoed, cameras flashed. From the outside, everything sparkled with triumph. But beneath the crystal lights and expensive perfume, pride and insecurity were weaving their own silent story. And before the night was over, that story would change everything. Because sometimes the greatest celebration reveals the smallest hearts. Long before the gala, long before the champagne and chandeliers, there were two women whose lives had been shaped by completely different worlds. Kathy had been born into comfort. Her childhood home stood behind iron gates, surrounded by manicured gardens and quiet staff who handled life's inconveniences before they could become problems. She grew up attending private schools, summering in Europe, learning which fork to use before she ever learned what it meant to struggle. Wealth, for her, was not earned. It was inherited like eye color or family heirlooms. She had been taught how to host, how to network, how to maintain appearances. And she did it beautifully. But comfort can build walls just as easily as it builds confidence. Lorie's world had been different. She had raised her son in a small apartment with thin walls and long nights. During the day, she worked as a seamstress in a local tailor shop, hands steady, eyes focused on fine details. In the evenings, she cleaned offices after everyone else had gone home. She stitched hems under dim light while Bobby studied at the kitchen table. She never complained. Not when money was tight, not when she was tired, not when life felt unfair. She simply kept going. Her hands carried calluses. Her heart carried quiet strength. When Bobby succeeded, he never forgot where he came from. He credited his mother for every opportunity he had. But love can sometimes blind even the most grateful sun. Because Bobby did not see what was happening beneath the surface. Kathy never insulted Lorie directly. She was far too polished for that. Instead, her words came wrapped in silk. "Oh, Lorie, you still work at your age? You must be exhausted. That dress is charming. Very vintage. Wouldn't you feel more comfortable in something more modern?" Each sentence delivered with a soft smile. Each comment light enough to dismiss if challenged, but heavy enough to wound if you were the one receiving it. Lorie always responded with grace. "Yes, I enjoy my work. I've always loved classic designs. I'm quite comfortable, thank you." But grace does not mean ignorance. She understood the tone, the subtle tightening in Kathy's voice, the slight pause before compliments, the careful distance at family gatherings. "She thinks I embarrass her," Lorie sometimes thought quietly, though she never said it aloud. And perhaps the harder truth was this. Kathy felt threatened by what she could not control. Because what unsettles someone raised on status more than a woman who earned her dignity? Bobby saw kindness in his wife. He saw devotion in his mother. He believed love would smooth over any differences. But not all tensions are loud. Some are silent, slow, almost invisible. Two women stood on opposite sides of the same family, shaped by different lessons about worth. One measured value by legacy and influence. The other measured it by sacrifice and contribution. They were not enemies, but they were mirrors. And sometimes, the reflection we fear most is the one that shows us what we lack. True class is not inherited. It is revealed in how you treat others. 2 weeks before the gala, the morning light poured gently through the tall windows of Bobby and Kathy's kitchen. The table was set neatly, fresh fruit, coffee, a folded newspaper. It was the kind of peaceful morning that gives no warning of what is quietly forming beneath it. Bobby looked up from his phone, thoughtful. "I should call Mom," he said casually. "She should come to the gala." The words hung in the air. For a brief second, Kathy froze. Not visibly. Her smile remained soft, her posture relaxed, but something tightened behind her eyes. "Of course," she replied sweetly. "We absolutely should invite her. It would be educational." Bobby missed the tone completely. He heard kindness, inclusion, support. But beneath Kathy's calm expression, a different thought flickered. This might actually be interesting. The gala would be filled with investors, executives, and women who had never known a day without privilege. Lorie, with her simple manners and quiet confidence, would stand out. Kathy imagined the awkward pauses, the subtle missteps, the whispered observations. Would she know which fork to use? Would she understand the unspoken rules? The idea stirred something inside Kathy, not cruelty in her own mind, but amusement disguised as curiosity. Later that afternoon, she met her friends for lunch at their usual private club. Crystal glasses, polished wood, laughter that carried just far enough to be noticed. "Kathy, are you bringing your mother-in-law to the gala?" one of them asked lightly. Kathy leaned back in her chair, lips curved in a knowing smile. .68. "Yes," she said softly. "I thought it might be entertaining." The table went quiet for half a second before quiet giggles spread among them. "Oh, this I have to see," another friend whispered. They began imagining it, Lorie trying to navigate conversations about venture capital and art auctions. They promised to observe discreetly, to engage her in conversation, to watch how she handled herself. Felt harmless in that moment, almost playful. But what is mockery if not insecurity wearing perfume? Kathy convinced herself it wasn't malicious. She wasn't excluding Lorie. She was including her. Wasn't that generous? Still, beneath the surface, the truth was harder to face. She was afraid. Afraid that Lorie's humble beginnings would reflect on her. Afraid that someone might whisper about Bobby's past. Afraid that perfection might crack under scrutiny. And instead of confronting that fear, she chose something easier: control. She would control the narrative, control the room, control how the story unfolded. Or so she believed. Because sometimes, the most carefully planned humiliation becomes the beginning of one's own lesson. When we invite someone to be small, we often reveal how small we feel inside. The invitation arrived in a thick ivory envelope, the kind that feels expensive even before you open it. Lorie held it gently in her hands, tracing the embossed lettering with her thumb. The gala, a celebration of her son's success. Formal attire required. She smiled. Bobby had always been thoughtful. Even now, running a company and carrying responsibilities she could barely imagine, he had remembered her. That alone warmed her heart. But Lorie was not naive. She understood the space she was being invited into. She understood the glances she had seen before, the careful politeness, the way conversations sometimes shifted when she entered the room. And she understood Kathy. Not with anger, not even with resentment, just awareness. There was a quiet tension in that house whenever she visited. A feeling that she did not quite fit the picture being carefully framed. For a brief moment, Lorie considered declining. It would be easier. No pressure. No whispers. No measuring eyes. But then she thought of Bobby standing at that podium. Of the years he had studied late into the night. Of the sacrifices they had made together. Would she stay home simply to make others comfortable? She folded the invitation carefully and placed it on the table. "I'll be there," she said softly to herself. "I didn't raise my son to hide from rooms I helped him build." That afternoon, she picked up the phone and dialed a number she had known for decades. "Tiffany? It's Lorie." On the other end was laughter warm with familiarity. Tiffany had been her friend since their 20s. Back when both of them were starting out, when dreams were stitched together with long hours and stubborn hope. Tiffany now owned a small boutique specializing in authentic vintage couture, pieces with history sewn into every seam. "I need your help," Lorie said gently. "I've been invited to a formal gala." There was a pause, then excitement in Tiffany's voice. "Oh, Lorie, I think I have just the thing." Later that evening, Lorie stood in Tiffany's boutique surrounded by dresses from another era, silks, satins, carefully preserved works of art. She ran her fingers along the fabric, appreciating the craftsmanship. She did not see price tags or status. She saw skill. She saw stories. When Tiffany revealed the midnight blue gown, Lorie inhaled slowly. The cut was elegant, timeless, not flashy, just refined. "You do it justice," Tiffany said softly. Lorie looked at her reflection. Silver hair, steady eyes, hands that had worked for decades yet still graceful. She did not need to become someone else for that room. She only needed to arrive as herself. Because dignity does not shout. It stands quietly and lets the world adjust. When you know your worth, you do not fear the room, you honor it. The night of the gala shimmered with expectation. Inside the grand ballroom, conversations floated like perfume in the air. Crystal chandeliers scattered golden light across silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. Waiters moved gracefully between clusters of guests, offering champagne that sparkled almost as brightly as the diamonds resting against elegant collars. Kathy stood near the center of it all, confident and composed. Her laughter blended perfectly into the hum of polished society. Every detail had unfolded exactly as she imagined. Almost. Across the room, Bobby remained near the entrance, checking his watch more than necessary. His heart felt strangely restless. And then, at exactly 7 o'clock, the soft sound of an engine echoed outside. Through the tall glass doors, headlights from a classic car cut through the night. It was not flashy, not loud, just dignified. The kind of car that carried history rather than noise. The door opened, and Lorie stepped out. She wore midnight blue silk that seemed to hold the evening sky within its folds. The vintage Dior gown fit her as though it had been waiting for her all along. The silhouette was timeless, elegant without effort, refined without exaggeration. Her silver hair was swept into a graceful updo, and pearl earrings rested gently against her skin. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. She simply walked forward. Inside the ballroom, conversations began to falter. Who is she? The doors opened fully, and Lorie entered beneath the chandeliers as if she had always belonged there. The silk of her gown caught the light in soft waves. Her posture was steady, her expression calm. There was no attempt to impress. No nervous smile. No apology in her presence. I am here for my son, she reminded herself quietly. Bobby's face changed the moment he saw her. Pride replaced anxiety. He crossed the room quickly, wrapping his arms around her in a hug that needed no explanation. The warmth between them was visible, genuine, unfiltered. Across the ballroom, Kathy's smile stiffened. This was not what she expected. There were no awkward glances. No whisper de amusement. Instead, eyes followed Lorie with admiration. Not because she was trying to shine, but because she did not need to. A woman nearby leaned toward her companion. Is that an original Dior? Another guest stepped closer, curiosity turning into respect. The air had shifted. What was meant to be entertainment had become presence. What was meant to be small had become unforgettable. And as Lorie stood beneath the lights, poised, radiant, unshaken, it became clear that dignity does not require permission from anyone in the room. True elegance is not worn, it is carried from within. First, it was just a glance. An older woman with diamonds resting heavily on her collarbone stepped closer to Lorie, her eyes narrowing not with judgment, but recognition. "Excuse me," she said gently, almost breathless. "Is that an original Dior from the 1956 spring collection?" The question carried across the nearby circle like a ripple in still water. Lorie smiled softly. "Yes, it is." A small crowd began to gather, not out of curiosity about scandal, but admiration for craftsmanship. Fingers hovered respectfully near the silk, careful not to touch. The woman leaned in, studying the stitching along the waistline. "The preservation is remarkable," she whispered. "Most pieces from that era never survive like this." Lorie's voice remained calm, grounded. Good fabric deserves good care, and so does good work. The conversation deepened, no longer about brands or price tags, but about history, about the hands that once shaped couture before fashion became fast and disposable. Lorie spoke about seam allowances, about hand-finished hems, about restoring delicate lace without disturbing its soul. And the more she spoke, the quieter the room around her became, because authenticity has a tone that performance cannot copy. At another table, a self-made investor joined in. His mother had worked in the garment district decades ago. He remembered the sound of a sewing machine late at night, the steady rhythm of sacrifice. "You understand craftsmanship," he said to Lorie, his voice thick with memory. "That kind of work builds more than clothing. It builds discipline," Lorie replied gently, "and pride." What began as a simple observation about a dress had turned into something richer, a shared language of effort and dignity. These were people who had built fortunes, who had clawed their way into rooms like this. And in Lorie they recognized something familiar. Substance. Across the ballroom, Kathy watched. The laughter at her own table felt thinner now. Conversations about vacations and designer exclusives sounded hollow compared to the thoughtful dialogue unfolding just yards away. This was not how it was supposed to go. They were supposed to laugh, she thought, her fingers tightening around her glass. Instead, they were listening. Instead, they were leaning in. What unsettles someone more than seeing respect freely given to the person you underestimated? The whispers Kathy had imagined never came. No awkwardness. No embarrassment. Only admiration that grew with every word Lorie spoke. Because Lorie was not performing. She was not trying to impress anyone in that room. She was simply telling the truth of who she had always been. And in a world so used to performance, truth feels rare. The room had shifted. The hierarchy had softened. The invisible measuring tape of status had been replaced with something quieter, recognition. Respect had not been demanded. It had been earned. Substance will always outshine spectacle. The orchestra softened as the master of ceremonies stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the man of the hour, Bobby." Applause filled the ballroom as Bobby walked toward the stage. The lights caught the edge of his smile, but those who knew him well could see the emotion beneath it. This was more than a business victory. It was the culmination of years of quiet struggle. He began as expected, He thanked his team. He acknowledged investors. He spoke about innovation, resilience, and vision. The words were polished, confident, everything a CEO's speech should be. But then he paused. And the pause felt different. He glanced toward the tables, searching. "There's someone here tonight," he said slowly, his voice softer now, "who deserves more credit than I could ever put into words." The room stilled. "My mother is here." Across the ballroom, Lorie looked up, startled. She had not expected attention. She had never wanted it. Bobby swallowed gently, emotion threading through his voice. "Everything I am, everything this company has achieved, rests on her sacrifice. She worked 2 jobs so I could go to college. She believed in me before anyone else did. She taught me that integrity matters more than image, that hard work is never beneath you, and that dignity isn't about what you own. It's about who you are." A silence settled over the crowd, deep, respectful. Kathy felt her breath catch. This was not part of the evening she had imagined. "Mom," Bobby continued, his eyes shining, "would you please stand?" For a moment, Lorie hesitated. Her instinct was to shrink from the spotlight. But slowly, gracefully, she rose to her feet. The first clap came from the investor who had spoken with her earlier. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom stood. The sound of applause swelled like a wave, strong, steady, undeniable. It was not polite. It was not forced. It was genuine recognition. Lorie stood there, her hands folded lightly in front of her, humbled yet steady. Kathy remained seated for half a second too long before rising with the others. The applause felt heavier to her, not because it was loud, but because it was deserved. "What have I built that would make a room stand for me?" She thought, the question sharp and unfamiliar. The diamonds on her wrist suddenly felt cold. All night, she had tried to control perception, to manage appearances, to protect an image. But this moment could not be managed. Because real honor cannot be arranged like seating charts. It grows from sacrifice, from love, from years of unseen effort. And as the applause continued, Kathy felt something she had avoided for a long time. Shame. Not the embarrassment of a failed plan, but the realization that she had underestimated the very foundation of the success she enjoyed. The applause finally softened, but the impact remained. Bobby stepped away from the podium, pride and gratitude written across his face. The city lights blurred past the car windows, streaks of gold and white against the dark sky. Inside the car, there was no orchestra. No applause. No polite laughter. Just silence. Bobby kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the steering wheel. Kathy sat beside him, her posture perfect as always. But something inside her had shifted. The diamonds at her ears felt heavier now. The silk of her gown no longer felt powerful. Minutes passed. Finally, Bobby spoke. "Did you invite my mother as a joke?" His voice was calm. That made it worse. Kathy's instinct was immediate: deny it, protect herself, deflect. That had always worked before. But tonight had stripped something away. She stared at her hands resting in her lap. "Yes," she whispered. The word hung between them. Bobby exhaled slowly. Not angry, just hurt. Why? It was such a simple question. And yet it felt enormous. Why had she done it? For entertainment? For control? For status? Or was it something deeper? Kathy swallowed, her throat tight. "Because I was afraid." Bobby glanced at her briefly, confusion crossing his face. "Afraid of what?" She stared out at the passing lights. "Afraid that people would judge me for where you came from. Afraid that your mother would remind them, and me, that I haven't actually built anything myself." The truth felt raw, uncomfortable, but also strangely freeing. All her life, Kathy had worn confidence like armor. She knew how to host, how to smile, how to belong in rooms filled with power. But tonight she had watched a woman with none of her advantages command more respect than she ever had. Not with money, not with image, but with substance. What do I actually stand for? She thought, the question echoing in her mind. She had inherited wealth, inherited connections, inherited status. But Lorie had built a life with her own hands. And that difference felt undeniable now. Bobby's voice softened. She's never tried to compete with you. I know, Kathy replied quietly. That's what makes it worse. Tears threatened, but she held them back. Not out of pride, out of realization. All night she had been exposed. Not publicly. No one had pointed fingers. No one had accused her. But she had seen herself clearly for the first time. The shallow conversations. The careful image. The need to look superior. What unsettles a person more than realizing the emptiness behind their own success? The car slowed at a red light. The city outside continued moving, unaware of the quiet transformation happening inside. I don't want to be that person, Kathy said finally. The one who needs someone else to look small in order to feel important. Bobby nodded slowly. Growth does not come with applause. It comes in moments like this when pride cracks and truth steps in. And as the light turned green, Kathy understood something she had avoided for years. Status can be inherited, but character must be chosen. The hardest truth to face is the one that asks you to change. The cafe was small and quiet, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. Morning light filtered through wide windows, soft and forgiving. Kathy arrived early. She chose a table near the corner, away from attention. No designer crowd. No social circle. Just the low hum of a coffee machine and the gentle clink of porcelain cups. Her hands rested around a warm mug she had barely touched. When the door opened and Lorie stepped inside, something inside Kathy tightened. Not with jealousy this time, but with humility. Lorie wore a simple blue cardigan. No diamonds. No statement pieces. Yet she carried herself with the same quiet dignity she had in that ballroom. Kathy stood. Thank you for coming, she said. Her voice steady but softer than usual. Lorie smiled politely. Of course. They sat across from each other. For a moment, neither spoke. The air held the weight of what had happened weeks ago, but it no longer felt sharp. Felt ready. Kathy took a slow breath. I owe you an apology. Lorie did not interrupt. I invited you that night for the wrong reasons, Kathy continued. I wanted control. I wanted to feel superior. And I was wrong. The words were not rehearsed. They were chosen carefully, but they were honest. Lorie studied her face, not with suspicion, but with patience. It takes courage to admit that, Lorie said gently. Kathy looked down at her hands. I've started volunteering at the community center, she admitted. It's small, just helping with financial literacy classes for women who are starting businesses. I thought I would feel awkward. Instead, I felt useful. A quiet smile touched Lorie's lips. Useful feels different than admired, she said. Kathy let out a small, almost surprised laugh. It does. There was no rivalry in the space between them now. No silent competition. Just two women at different stages of understanding. Respect had replaced insecurity. Weeks earlier, Kathy would have measured Lorie by her clothes, by her background, by what she did not have. Now she measured her by strength, by sacrifice, by the way she raised a son who honored her in a room full of power. Isn't that the kind of legacy every woman quietly hopes for? The conversation shifted to simple things, family, work, small dreams. It was not dramatic. It was not grand. It was real. And as they rose to leave, Kathy felt lighter. Not because she had gained status, but because she had released the need for it. Outside, the morning sun felt warmer. For the first time, Kathy was not trying to stand above another woman. She was learning to stand beside her. True respect is not taken, it is earned through contribution.